Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the Dorky Dunkleosteus. I'm so happy to have you here. I am your curator, Carla, and this week we are going to talk about the geologic timescale and how we can better grasp the 4.5 million years of geologic history. So, the Earth is approximately 4.54 billion years old. That is really hard to put into perspective. We do have some graphs right here, some examples. It's mind-blowing. Even geologists such as myself can really get our minds just completely blown out of the water when we really think about how old the Earth is and how old the fossils and rocks that we handle on a day-to-day basis is. It's completely mind-boggling. And there's a whole bunch of different ways that we can actually put this into perspective in a way that doesn't blow our squishy little 5-pound gray matter brain. So the graph here, well, the example here, just puts into perspective how big a billion is. So 50,000 is one dot, 1 million, that's a nice little line. And then you have a billion. And that is so unbelievably huge. It makes my brain hurt. It really does. So just putting in that's really hard to grasp. How can we better do this? So we have a geologic timescale. This is the latest one from the GSA, or the Geological Society of America. And of course, we have the four main eras. We have the Precambrian, Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic. They're then broken down into periods and aeons and all this kind of other stuff that my geology teachers are going to kick my butt that I can't quite remember. But it's a good way to represent in chunk of time how big or how long a period of time was on the Earth. It's kind of really, especially when you get into the Precambrian and the early Paleozoic, well, mostly it's the Precambrian, it is really hard to get an exact date on anything. We don't have a lot of fossils from that era. We don't really have a lot of material that we can reliably date. We actually don't have a lot of rock from that era. We very rarely will find some, and when we do, it really gets geologists excited because this means we actually have something that we can look at and we can see in a physical form how the Precambrian was. So the geologic timescale is a good way to put it. That's really nice. It's visual. It's really cool, but it's still really hard to wrap around how long the planet has been. So, what if we put it into a single calendar Earth year? So this is not a new concept. Actually, Carl Sagan did it to the universal time. Universal time is even larger than the geologic timescale. It's on several ways you can find it on the internet. I'll put a link in the description. I forgot to grab one for the end of the sources. But it's absolutely fascinating because it gets into perspective how young this little planet, this little blue orb that we live on, how young that is compared to the rest of the universe. So when we actually take a calendar year and we put it to Earth's age, it makes it a little easier for us to comprehend because we all know how long a year is. Our species lives 80 plus years. And we can comprehend how long a year is, how long a day is, all these little man-made constructions in time, because time is a human construct. We're the only animals that have a knowledge of time. And then you have space-time and all sorts of other astronomical things that we could get into, but that's not really my specialty, although it's fascinating. Let's start out at December 31st, 11 hour, 59 minutes and 59 seconds. The very second that the year begins. So Earth is formed, and this is the Hayden Aeon. So we are at the very, 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 very beginning of Earth. It's all the way down here. Wait, down there. That is where we are. There's not a lot from the Hayden Aeon. We really don't have a lot. Okay, so Earth is formed. Awesome. Let's go to the first day of the year. January 1st, we have baby Earth. It's so cute and it's so deadly. Doesn't have much of an atmosphere. It's incredibly hot and boiling. The surface pretty much hasn't been solidified yet. And it has absolutely zero capability of holding life. On January 7th, a Mars-sized object collides with Earth and gives us our moon. Yay! Hello, Luna, we have a friend. There's a couple of different ways that we figure this happened, but we're pretty sure that the object, whatever it was, whether it be an asteroid or a meteorite or even another protoplanet, actually slammed into us, and from the ejecta that got removed from our planet, that is what formed our moon. 3 days later, January 11th, we have water. Well, the first traces of water. So we're first seeing hydrogen and oxygen bonds together to make liquid water. And this is so important for life because without liquid water, at least in our concept of what life is, we would have no life. And we fast forward to the end of the month, we see the first primitive oceans begin, January 20th. We have basically a cascading effect. So water is it likes itself. It's hydrophilic. Hot water is itself hydrophilic, so it likes to be with other droplets or molecules of water. So once you get one little piece of water, one little atom of water, well, molecule of water, you'll get other droplets of water forming. They coalesce and they become the primitive oceans that we see at the end of January. Into February. Oh my fucking god, incoming! This is pretty much all of February. We have been bombarded with meteorites and asteroids, and the moon took a lot of these hits too. In fact, that's why we have the moon's craters. That's why we see the man in the moon or the rabbit in the moon, depending on where you're from. Because we have the moon, we actually know what Earth probably would have looked like if we didn't have water and an atmosphere and weather. Because if we didn't, we would look like the moon. We would have craters everywhere. And in fact, we still do. We can find prehistoric and very old craters across the globe. Generally, they erode very quickly because of plate tectonics and because of our weather and because we have water and because we have an atmosphere. And also, we have a great shield. Thank you, Luna. Thank you, Earth, for saving Earth, Luna. We really love it. There's still no life, though, even coming into February. All right, let's continue on. March, nothing really happens. It just continues this bombardment, but it settles down. We're finally coming out of the winter. Well, April 3rd, we get primitive life. So we have right over here, we have our first little primitive bacterial cells, single-celled organisms that are beginning. These are asexual. They do not have sexual reproduction. These are the very building cells of life, really. They're very simple, and they survive. This happens between 4.5 to 3.77 billion years ago. This actually is pretty far into time-wise period, as you can see. January, February, March, into April. This isn't until April 3rd that we actually finally get life. Hey, we're still here though. So, okay, let's continue on. May, nothing. And June, hey, awesome. June 28th, the end of June. We're getting into the heat of summer. Photosynthesis. It finally becomes a thing. So photosynthesis actually begins in early cells. So they're able to process light into sugars and actually begin a more complex form of life and evolution. So that happens in the Archean era. August, so we skip over July as these cells, these photosynthetic cells, finally continue to evolve, and we're all the way into August 6th. We have eukaryotic cells. Eukaryotic cells are more complex. They actually feast on other things. They're not just photosynthetic. That happens in the Photorezoic era. I have them all kind of lensed out as general locations. Because there is, like I said earlier, there is a bit of a margin of error between the beginning and the end. So this is their best guesses. But this is really cool. And you know what else is really cool about eukaryotic cells? Well, eukaryotic cells, once we get into September, they begin to, well, do something weird. By September 17th, we have the Opisthosacan, the stuff that will eventually become fungus. So fungus is one of the oldest living creatures on the planet. Fungus is really weird. It's not a plant. It's not an animal. It's its own kind of thing. It makes us, as all scientists, scratch our heads because some of them are the largest living organisms. And they're also the oldest living organisms on the planet. Cool. All right. So we've got our first year karyotic cells. We've got the beginnings of fungi. Well, what's next? Wow, wow, wow. In Spoopy Time October, we finally get sexual reproduction. So it has taken us 10 months to finally get sexual reproduction. Okay, awesome. That means we have greater diversification, we have greater complexity, and we're really building those stepping stones to complex animals into what will be coming forth, the explosions of life. November, now we're really starting to snowball everything together. It goes quick. And in fact, the first thing that happens is the snowball Earth effect on November 5th. This is when the Earth, the entire surface is covered in ice. Now, we're not sure how many times this has happened over the planet's time period, but we know about November 5th in our calendar is when it first really happened. And this is when all of the water, at least surface water, is completely frozen solid. This should spell the end of all life, but it doesn't, because eventually volcanic activity and continuing geothermal activity and plate tectonics end the snowball Earth effect by releasing tons of CO2 in the atmosphere and giving us a greenhouse effect. So awesome. We're out of the snowball Earth. And now we have the first actual explosion of life, not the Cambrian, but the Avalon explosion. Happened before the Cambrian, but it was still just as important. These animals, well, life forms, were complex enough to leave fossils. We're still finding some, and this is really important because this actually pushes back in time when life became complex. So if you remember my last episode, I was talking about Precambrian life forms with graboids. Well, there were Precambrian life forms. There were actually fairly complex and relatively large Precambrian life forms. And that's really cool. But they weren't graboids. Tear. All right, November 19th, we get the Cambrian explosion. This is the changeover into a new time period for the Earth. So we're now getting into the Paleozoic. Sorry, Precambrian, we're all done with you. Now it's onto the Paleozoic. And this is also, so it's November 17th when Jaws evolve. The bony thing, not the shark. I love Bruce, the shark from Jaws. But he evolved much later into time. So November 30th, plants finally take over above the water in complexity. Here we are. Here's our geologic timescale. I've blown it up for us. So we have the Avalon way over in Precambrian before the Precambrian extinction event, or rather event. And then we have the Cambrian explosion. We have Jaws first evolving in the Silurian, along with plants starting to diversify online at the beginning of the Devonian. The Devonian period, of course, is my favorite other than the Mesozoic era. Paleozoic is where everything really starts to take off, and we'll see that even more coming into the next month, December. December gets broken down into smaller days, even hours. And this is where everything just goes into overdrive. The 1st of December, we have our first amphibians. December 3rd, we have transition from fish to complete land animals. The first amphibian was actually Tiktaalik. It was amphibious, it still could go into water, and it still kind of relied on water to be able to get enough oxygen. By the 3rd, Tiktaalik was no longer around, and we had the first true land tetrapods. Tetrapods meaning 4 feet. The 4th brings us a vast rainforest covered the world. So this is the beginning of the Carboniferous period. This is when we have a lot of woody trees, large trees, and we're getting some giant insects. This period is also when we get most of our carbon from, the stuff that we burn. So a lot of our coal, a lot of the carbon in the world comes from basically December 4th. This is kind of important to think about as we get further on into this month, because it's December 4th. This is where all the carbon that we use today as coal or natural gas. All that stuff comes from this day. By December 8th, Pangea is finally formed. Yeah, rock out! Greenite Pangea. Eventually that will happen, but it'll be long after I'm gone, and probably long after humans are gone. By December 11th, we have the Great Dying. What is the Great Dying? That is the Permian-Triassic extinction. And here we have the Paleozoic, all nice and broken down. So we have the Devonian, we have our first amphibians, first true land mammals come along in the Carboniferous, and then later in the Carboniferous, we have the Pangea, and then of course, the end of the Permian, the beginning of the Triassic is the Great Dying. That's 96% of animals were actually wiped off the face of the planet. That's pretty intense. Very intense. All right, let's continue on with December. So December 12th, we have the first dinosaurs in the Triassic. Actually, it's about the mid-Triassic that they finally evolve. There were a few kind of interesting creatures that were around during the Triassic, early Triassic periods. They didn't make it out, and dinosaurs, because they were diversifying and they were easily adaptable, they continued on by the 15th from the Jurassic extinction. By the 17th, dinosaurs have really taken over. They are the dominant land species on the planet, and they are incredibly diverse. By December 26th, we finally see the big guy, Tyrannosaurus rex, is finally appearing. That's earlier in the day. Later that same day, KT extinction. KT extinction stands for Cretaceous Tertiary extinction. That's the most common way to refer to it, although some paleontologists and geologists are referring it to a different type, the KC extinction, for the Cretaceous Cenozoic extinction. All right, so here it is. 14 days, all of the Mesozoic takes place. Wow. 2 weeks. 2 weeks is all of the Mesozoic. The dinosaurs rose and fell, and mammals began to rise. So, December 27th, we get terror birds. Terror birds are the last bastion of pretty much the dominance of Dinosauria in the end of the Mesozoic into the beginning of the Cenozoic. They were 8 to 10 feet tall, large, flightless birds, very heavy-bodied, distant relatives to some of the heavy-bodied birds that we have today, such as ostriches, cassowaries, emus, and the like. These guys were pretty much the last real big dinosaurs, because birds are dinosaurs, that really held control over most of the planet as top carnivores. Then, by the very next day, December 28th, we get carnivorous mammals beginning to appear. So we get our large felines, our large canines. So we get the felidae, the canidae, wolves, dire wolves, smilodons, lions, cave lions. We get these large carnivorous mammals that are beginning to take over, and they just tear out the terror birds. And we no longer see those large terror bird genuses. We do have some remnants in the way that certain species of modern birds, modern dinosaurs, aves, actually move and behave. But other than that, pretty much that is the end of the terror birds. So now we're getting into hours. And in fact, we're getting into minutes once we hit December 30th. At 9:24 p.m., the last common ancestor of the great apes and all primates actually existed. So this is when the great apes, so the tailless primates and great apes actually began to split off. This was at 9:24 p.m. the last common ancestor existed. At 10:38 p.m. the last common ancestor between humans and gorillas existed. So, not even an hour later, our ancestors broke off from the common ancestor for gorillas. Well, let's go a little further. 12:36 p.m. on December 31st. The last common ancestor of humans and chimpanzees exist. So this is with just about 11 and a half hours to go until today. We have the last common ancestor of both humans and chimpanzees existing. This is where they split off. At 2:21 p.m., the South African mammoth appears. So this is a common ancestor to elephants, and this is where all of the mammoth species begin to develop. At 4:16 p.m., Australopithecus appears. Australopithecus is one of our earliest ancestors and was the first primate to walk fully upright with long term. Not like gorillas and chimpanzees can do. They can walk upright for a short period of time, but they don't walk purposefully or long distance on two legs. It's only Australopithecus and the relations that it has. At 5:49 p.m., Lucy walks the earth. Lucy is one of our earliest ancestors. She's a member of the Australopithecus family, and we actually know exactly when she was. We have her dated. She's also one of the most complete hominids that we've discovered, and it's really cool because she was our ancestor. And at 5:49, she finally walked the earth in the Great Rift Valley in South Africa. At 6:35, we have Homo habilis finally using tools. This is another one of our ancestors. And they're using tools. They're using flints. They're using stones. We've entered the Stone Age. At 8:20 p.m., Homo erectus masters fire. This is one of our ancestors. And with that mastering of fire, we're actually able to cook our food. This is what allows our brains to grow because we are doing things that make it easier for us to survive. By cooking our food, we don't have to worry about diseases as much. By eating meat, we are increasing the proteins that we need to build and having sugars that we need to build complex brain structures. And we're beginning to show the beginnings of culture because when fire is around, people naturally bring themselves together. It gives us safety. It chases away the darkness. At 11:13 p.m., Homo neanderthalis walks Europe. This is one of our ancestors as well. Even though we're not direct descendants, Homo neanderthalis, or just Neanderthals, actually crossbred with our direct ancestors. So a majority of today's Homo sapiens sapiens actually do have Neanderthal DNA in them. The last hour and 47 minutes of December 31st. At 11:36 p.m., Homo sapiens appear alongside Neanderthal and Homo denisovians. Again, all three of us evolved pretty simultaneously. That makes sense because there's a lot of different ways for a species to evolve, and multiple species means chances are one, if not a couple of them, are going to survive. We know that Neanderthal did survive, actually, by breeding with Homo sapiens. And even though the majority of them eventually die out and they no longer are considered their own species, their genetics still live within us. At 11:46 p.m., a glacial period begins. This is one of many ice ages that the Earth has seen. This is simply the most recent one. Of course, this is a time of glacial advancement. Of course, even today, we are still in an ice age because there is ice on both the north and southern poles. But we're going to get to that a little bit later. And by a little bit later, I mean in a few seconds. Because 11:58, Neanderthal and Denisovian humans disappear. And it's within the last final few seconds of the year that the Anthropocene begins. Humans develop the Industrial Revolution. CO2 production increases to such an amount that we're actually having an impact. And the world sees the beginning of its sixth most devastating extinction caused by one species, Homo sapiens sapiens. This is incredibly fast. And it's when you put something like the vastness of our planet's geology into one single year that you realize it's only been a few seconds since we've been on this planet long enough. And we're doing something that has taken the Earth millions, billions of years to go through. 5, possibly 6 other extinctions. There's some arguments over a 6th, and this most recent one being a 7th extinction event. We are burning the coal that was just really put down December 4th in this timeline. That is incredible, and the fact is, we're running out. We're strip mining. We're poisoning waterways because of how we process this stuff. And even though this is so incredibly advanced, and we've had advancements in technology to get this far, we need to continue to advance. And by that, I mean we need to get away from these fossil fuels that are limited. I'm a geologist. I see these patterns in the rocks in this geologic timescale, and this isn't normal. To have a satellite view of Eagle Island off the coast of Antarctica and seeing land instead of ice, that is terrifying. I'm going to be 33 in April. 3 decades, a little over 3 decades of my life. And I remember when they were talking about an advancement on glaciers. And now I'm seeing in my adult life such decreases that glaciers are gone. And this is getting kind of serious, but I think it's something we really need to do now. So if you want to skip over, if you want to end the video now, that's fine. But I have to speak my mind on this because we only have one planet. There's no planet B. We aren't advanced enough to try and terraform the moon, let alone Mars. We don't have that. Right now, as much as I love the stars and the moon and the thought of being able to go into space, we need to have a home base to come back to. That's not going to happen if we continue to burn our coal, if we continue to do this destroying strip mining. We need to look at green energy. Wind, water, geothermal. Heck, even if we can do solar panels, it's not that much. It's come down in price. But the thing is, it's not individuals like you or I. No, it's big companies. And please, I'm gonna get a little political here, and I apologize. I'm also getting a little teary-eyed because this is terrifying to me. Please, talk to your congresswomen and congressmen if you're in the U.S. If you're not, talk to your representatives across the world. Tell them we need to stop. We need to stop now. This planet will survive without us, but we cannot survive without Earth. We will not survive. Period. We need to give back. We need to buckle down. We need to start putting pressure on these companies and our governments to say enough is enough. We have the way to do it now. We have the technology. We can do it. We can build it better. We could. If people would just listen, and if people would just take the little bit of initiative to do it. So please, sorry if it got a little political, but this is really important because this puts it into all perspective. We've only been here a couple seconds in the year, and we're running out of time already. So, sorry, got a little bit on a soapbox. I'm going to come off my soapbox now. So here we have the sources that I used. The geologic timescale that I used, that actually put it to the year had a little bit of inconsistencies, so I did the major stuff that I could actually corroborate with my own research. And of course, the geologic timescale I got right from the GSA. GSA is a cool website if you want to check it out. It's a lot of fun. So again, thank you so much for listening to me ramble. And again, sorry that it got a little political and a little heavy, but it is something that we really need to think about. So anyway, if you have any suggestions for next week's topic, please leave them in the comments below. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below too. I love answering some questions. Please press like. I like seeing the like buttons. It makes me feel happy. Leave some subscriptions. Yeah, press the subscribe button. Get to know when we're going live, and of course, ring, ding, ding, ding that bell, and then you know that we will be going live more regularly now. I think I've got it all figured out how to do live gaming. So yeah. Thank you again so much for listening to me and for joining me today on our discussion. I'm so happy to have you here. And see you next week. Keep digging. Bye-bye.